Hi everybody and welcome to Leadbetter Live today. We're delighted to have Dr. Jim Loehr with us. Jim, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Stuart. Thank you.
No, thank you for making the time and thanks for everybody that's tuned in today. I see we've got almost 100 people watching the webinar at this point, and obviously we want to make this an interactive session. So the viewers that are watching, please feel free to ask some questions. We might not be able to answer all of them, but we'll certainly field as many as we can, and we'll hopefully get some golden nuggets from Jim along the way. So for those of you that are listening that don't know me, my name's Stuart Clayton. I'm head of education for David Leadbetter Golf Worldwide. We've recently started the Leadbetter Golf University, of which Dr. Jim Loehr produced one of our first courses called The Only Way to Win. And then a little bit about Jim is he's a world-renowned performance psychologist. He's been an author of 16 books, I believe, the most recent of which is The Only Way to Win, which is the course that we have that everything's based around. And Jim, a little bit about your history. You started off after your studies in the mental health world and then moved on to the performance side of things with humans. In 1992, you set up the Human Performance Institute. And really the mission there was to help individuals and teams to perform to their potential under high stress environments. And I believe, through that, you've developed 17 people to be #1 competitors in their chosen sports, and obviously a lifetime dedicated to the world of human performance. And I've been very fortunate to listen to you speak at some of our summits and really kind of listen to the experience that you bring to the room. And I can't wait to chat with you again today. So once again, thank you for being with us.
You're very welcome. I'm excited to participate in this webinar.
Yeah. So you built the course for the Leadbetter Golf University called The Only Way to Win, and that was the title of your latest book. Can you tell us or elaborate a little bit more on what the core thesis of that book is?
It's interesting. In my career, I had an opportunity to work with lots and lots of superstars in a variety of areas of expertise, and I began to notice something that really caught my attention. And this book actually, it took many years to kind of evolve and to be able to, we had so many hundreds of thousands of people go through the Institute, and we tracked them for years and years. And we tried to understand what was the impact of this chase to become an extraordinary success in their chosen sport, or even if it was a surgeon, or even if it was a military special forces. And what we began to realize was that so many of us have been, in a sense, kind of duped into thinking that achievement is really the end all of life, that if we could just really achieve great things in life, we're going to be happy, we're going to be well adjusted, we're going to have great character. And what I began to realize is that a lot of the folks, even though they were #1 in the world, they were extremely unhappy. They were very dissatisfied. They felt empty inside. And the only thing they could imagine that might help them to get over this really major obstacle in terms of just feeling good about themselves was to achieve more, to get another 5 titles, to win another Grand Slam, to become another superstar over and over again. And when they would do that, they would come back and say, I still feel kind of empty inside. So we began to realize that so many of us have been taught to believe that external achievements actually drive great happiness, fulfillment, and bring a great sense of meaning to our lives. And the fact is, there's no data, no research to support that. What we learned is that the more we go after and become addicted to external markers, they do serve to kind of drive us, give us energy and excitement, but they, in and of themselves, they're not that fulfilling. And so what the book is about was that really ultimately all achievement should be repurposed to become something much greater than just simply your own self-interest. And that being able to, build your character to become a stronger, more extraordinarily, committed person to causes bigger than yourself. I remember so many athletes, not the least of which being Andre Agassi, that when he repurposed his tennis career to actually serve the needs of young people in developing a charter school, something magical happened to him. Being number one in the world was like, didn't all these people had told him that it would be such a great thing if he'd have all the money, all the fame, all the glory, everything, and all that came true, but he didn't feel anywhere close to what he had hoped he would feel in terms of satisfaction and fulfillment. And once he did that, something magical happened inside of him. And that transformed him. He began to work harder than he'd ever worked before. And he actually achieved number one in the world. And the happiness that he was looking for started to come. So this book is about, let's get the reason. We all need to achieve, but let's get the reason for it. And if we can repurpose achievement to become extraordinary human beings of great character, particularly moral and ethical character, is in our treatment of others and our concern for others, something magical can happen.
That's interesting. That reminds me a little bit more recently. There's a famous boxer from the United Kingdom where I'm based, Tyson Fury, and he kind of went through a similar experience, became one of the best in the world, and was empty, had a lot of mental health problems. But you talk a lot there about character. If the only way to win is with character, but also the only way to lose is with character, how did you get there in your career to this point?
Well, first of all, I can tell you as a psychologist, in all my years of work and study and intensive research, nothing spoke to me about this. I had to learn this through all of my work with athletes and with all these extraordinary achievers. And what I began to realize is that, something really important maybe has been missed here that I think could contribute to almost everyone who is trying to do something important with their lives. And so we did a small experiment. It spanned 6 years at the Human Performance Institute. I had a small academy of about 20 kids, and we just recruited kids from around our area. We didn't go out and recruit like Voluntary does or any of the big academies and bring in the best. We just took the local kids, and we decided to try something over a 6-year period. We would take all the stresses, all the injuries, all of the disappointments, all of the joys, everything from our academy, which was held every day, 5 days a week, some days 6 days a week, and then all the tournaments. For 6 years, we made the number one reason for playing tennis and for working so hard to become a better human being, more character driven in every way. And every day the kids had to fill out a journal, and they had to pick a particular strength of character that they wanted to work on that day. So it could have been everything from honesty to punctuality to, we have both, as we'll talk about maybe here, both performance and ethical moral character, but sportsmanship, kindness, all of these issues that we don't normally think of in the context of competition, really rough competition. And every day they would do that, and then they would fill it out, and then they would sit down and talk about this with their coaches. And something, again, quite amazing happened. Over the 6-year span, nearly every one of them became an extraordinary achiever. One played number 1 and 2 for West Point. Another one number 1 and 2 for Harvard. They all got college scholarships, basically. They all went on and become very successful. But for us, the exciting thing was that they grew as human beings in a way that really wasn't linked just simply to achieving success in tournaments. They weren't really afraid to lose, because if they lose, that gave them a chance to work on their resilience, on their ability to handle rough things, and so on and so forth. And every single thing that happened was put in the context of trying to become a better human being. At the end of that 6-year period, Lorenzo Beltrame, who was the main coach, we had a number of coaches, and all of us were quite amazed at the impact that this had on these kids. And so this book actually tried to represent a lot of the things that we've discovered, and they're in the character space, which for me is a completely different way of looking at the competitive arena. Who you are as a person is probably a lot more important than who you are as a competitor, but they're very close in terms of one feeding on the other properly if it's properly done. So for me, it was a really interesting journey.
No, that sounds fantastic. I mean, you say a small study, and 6 years is not a small amount of time, but I think something within the world of Leadbetter, we've recently evolved the Leadbetter Kids program, and there is a huge focus on the life skills, the environment we create, the culture, the behaviors, and again, trying to just help them be a better human being, like you said. And I think one of the big things be interesting to hear from you is, how do you make the distinction between performance character and that what you've just talked about, the moral and ethical character?
Well, there are some, I call them muscles of character that drive performance, that help you become an extraordinary performer. And those skills are everything from being disciplined, being focused, being positive, being resilient, be engaged, and really be there fully in the present when you're working, even in practice. Really working to actually hone skills that help you really achieve great things, but they're very different than what I would call moral and ethical skills. Moral and ethical skills really connect you to the relationship you have with other people, how you treat other people. Things like truthfulness and integrity, or humility, gratefulness, justice, fairness. These are of a different order. They're closely connected to the performance skills, but you can be a great performer and be pretty much a zero in terms of your moral and ethical character. We see it all the time in the corporate world. A lot of competitors will see that a lot of the people they're competing against seem to be, they're willing to take any shortcut. The only thing that they're really concerned about is winning, and if they can get away, if they can take a shortcut, even though it really crosses moral lines, they don't care. And so I made this distinction between performance character and ethical and moral character, and what we found is the highest level of real inner strength that a human being has comes from the way in which they're treating other people. So these issues of, respect for others, sportsmanship, this notion that you are always careful, kindness, compassion, warmth, and love, you would think this is on the opposite end of the continuum of being a great competitor, but it really was not the case. These are at the heart of you believing in yourself, feeling good about yourself, which enables you to actually go out and be a real force in any competitive battle. And maybe we'll talk about how that works, but it was an interesting understanding for us how the moral character is the highest level of health that we have, and perhaps the most important in terms of sustained success in anything we do.
No, fantastic information. And I think for anybody listening and watching today, whether they're a golf instructor, a coach for a team, or whether they're a golfer themselves, that there's so many valuable pieces of information in there. And I know certainly for me, from the coaching world, about the environment you create and what you're trying to do long term with your players is huge there. And it'd be interesting to hear you speak a little bit about the connection between the self-esteem that an athlete or a person has and the extrinsic achievement. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Self-esteem is a really interesting area as well. There's a lot of research around this that it's gone on for years and years. And what's interesting is that we found that low self-esteem is a problem, but surprisingly, so is high self-esteem. What we're really looking for is stable self-esteem. And what we learned is that the more you tie your sense of value as a human being to things over which you have little control, you're always vulnerable. If you have very little self-esteem, you're always fragile. You're always vulnerable. You're always afraid things are you're waiting for the next shoe to drop. If you have high self-esteem, you really believe you're almost above it all. It's kind of, you become the king or queen of that particular sport, and you have very little that you can learn, because you don't have enough humility to really say, I've got a lot more to learn here, and it's very hard for you to connect to other people. You really value people who achieve really great things, and you kind of dismiss people who are kind of the normal run-of-the-mill competitors. And we've learned that both of those have barriers to you becoming the best you can be. So the most important insight we learned is that stable self-esteem, which is really crucial, is linked to your ability to find value in things that you actually control over. So we asked people multiple times over many years, who are you at your very best? When you're most proud of yourself, particularly under stress? And they would say things like, I felt calm or patient, positive, resilient. They come up with their 6 words. And then we asked them, how do you want to be remembered? What would you like etched on your tombstone after you're gone, if they were really true about who you are? And pretty much the same words actually surfaced. And none of them said anything about, I want to have 10 titles. I want to be a successful playing pro. I want to have, national championships, this many, whatever it is. And these were all kind of linked to things that were really, really intrinsic in terms of who they were. Again, it took us back to the character space. And for us, it was very interesting that this occurred across the spectrum with athletes, corporate executives, special forces, and so forth. And so we began to realize that the more you could link your energy and your effort to becoming those things that you want to be represented in your life, and you at your very best, your best self, then your self-esteem is not so fragile, because you can do this, you can invest in these and get better. But if your self-esteem is tied to winning this tournament, to achieving this particular goal at the end of the year, you don't have direct control over that. So you're only as good as your last performance. And if you had a miserable performance, now you're fragile again. We're looking for stable self-esteem, and that comes from the feeling that you're a good person. You're a person of value, and you have a connection to others and to the world that actually you feel proud about. The pride that you have in being your best self, and it's actually becoming more and more evident as you get older and as you work through this competitive process of golf or any other sport. So that was a very interesting understanding for us about this issue of self-esteem and how fragile people can become when it's all tied to outcomes, a scorecard that you have virtually no control over in an absolute sense.
Absolutely, and going through your course that you developed for the Leadbetter University platform, I thought that was one of the most powerful areas, was the tombstone exercise. Certainly for me, going through it, it made you think a little bit about who you are as a person and what you want. And I guess that ties in a little bit. I know, in your publications and your course, you also said that, that the centerpiece of somebody's life purpose is really the why. And I know as coaches, we tend to focus a lot on, what do people want? Why do they want it? And then how can we figure out to get them there? But how would you connect the purpose that somebody has and the why with their performance?
The centerpiece of everyone's lives is their sense of purpose, is their reason for actually being here. What is your life about? Why are you even here? We come into the world through no effort or nothing that we actually did to make that happen. And then all of a sudden we awaken to the reality that, I actually have some choices to what I want to do with my life. And what is my purpose? Why am I here? What do I want to do with this thing we call life for as long as I'm here? And if a person doesn't have a real deep sense of purpose in their life becomes a nightmare. Life becomes meaningless. And if you have the wrong purpose, a purpose that's actually very misguided, it can also be a nightmare. What we learned at the Institute was the importance of a person going in and establishing their own sense of purpose, really digging deep into their life and understanding what contributions they want to make in the time that they have. And once they got the purpose right, everything else could be put into place. I have a very favorite quote that I want to read because I think it really is, it's a brilliant one. And it's by Albert Camus, the French philosopher. And he says, "In the depth of winter, I finally learned that within me, there lay an invincible summer." And what he was speaking to is that, life can get tough, sport can get tough. But for me, if you have the right purpose, and it really isn't just about you, it's about something much greater than you, and you really using every storm, every challenge, every obstacle to grow as a human being and be better for the world, there is an invincible summer that you always can tap into. And that summer is your inner strength, that sense of purpose that it cannot, it's boundless, and it releases energy that you never knew you had. In the depths of a dark time like this pandemic, people reach in and they find resources inside themselves they never really knew they had, as long as you have a purpose for fighting. Friedrich Nietzsche, said, and I think most everyone has heard it, but it's he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. That if even when you get through the injuries and all the tough times and the bad losses and everything else, when coaches help students begin to put this in a context, this is the story of life, and every single thing that happens to you here is a practice opportunity for when you go out into the real world and have to deal with these things. So we repurpose all these little obstacles that we face in the hope that we'll develop the resilience to handle something like a pandemic that has descended on us, and we have no idea where this came from or how long it will last. All we know is we have to fight. And if you have a purpose that takes you well beyond yourself, you're really not fighting for yourself. You're fighting for others, to help others to be able to get through this. Something magical happens, and you touch that invincible summer.
No, fantastic. Fantastic, Jim. We've got a great question come in from the viewers here, and all the guys watching, guys and girls watching and viewing, please send some questions in if you've got anything. But Jim, Grant has asked if you could explain how best to deal with outcome thinking, both short and long term.
Setting goals is not a bad thing. I mean, obviously it helps us to stay organized. It helps us to focus our energy. Having goals in practice, knowing exactly what your practice is going to be, and then those practices, maybe even counting the number of shots you hit or out of the bunker to a certain area of target, and to have weekly goals, to have monthly goals, to have yearly goals, short-term, long-term, intermediate. Those are all, we know in the research, those are very helpful. But goals that you don't necessarily control do not, in fact, contribute to your sense of really stability in terms of, the valuing you have for yourself, your self-esteem. So what we really want to do is understand that the more you're able to focus on what you're doing in the moment, which is a strength, which is just like a muscle of your calf or your forearm, it has to be strengthened. This ability to focus in the moment and to let it go, have a target in mind, have a goal, but to absolutely trust it and allow it to actually take its own course. And then you make adjustments, and then you come back and do it again. And if it doesn't work out, it's simply a no, but you don't put all of your energy and effort and all of your self-esteem on whether or not that actually went to the exact spot that it was supposed to. You let that go, and you're in a sense, you're training your brain to actually to understand how to be fully present in the moment, not worry about the outcome, not worry about if you are successful or not, because you can't control that. Put all of your attention, all of your focus in this present moment, and then execute, and then learn from it and move forward again. And that is an acquired strength. Being a great competitor is not normal. That is not a normal skill. If you want it, you can have it, but you intentionally have to go out and work on it, and eventually that trust will come, and you'll feel like you're more in control of the process. And it's certainly that you haven't given up goals. It's simply that you have divorced yourself in the moment of impact with that ball from any consequence. All you're doing is putting the data in the computer and executing, and that's a skill.
Oh, fantastic. I know there was another question came in around, talking to golfers that are maybe just trying to break 90 and not at the elite level. But I think what you've just touched upon there is valid for any level of player. But correct me if I'm wrong, Jim.
Yeah, that's the same process. Even your pros on tour, and I work with several of them, they're struggling with exactly the same thing. Particularly when their confidence drops, you worry more about the outcome, and which is really unfortunate. But the more confidence you have, the more you trust. You trust in your mechanics. You trust in your, if you have a caddy, you trust in the information you're getting from your caddy, and from your assessment of club selection and so forth. When you lose confidence, you start worrying about the outcome. And so this is another great opportunity to go back and work this particular skill under pressure, to try to build this very discrete skill in staying 100% focused on what you're doing in this moment, and let it go. Trust in the outcome.
Yeah, brilliant. Jim, I think we touched a little bit about our life purpose and understanding the why. There's a nice question actually come in, and I think I'd be kind of a little bit around this area as well. I think it's only in the last couple of years I kind of understand a little bit more what my why is and who I am as a coach. But the question is really we talked about finding your purpose, but how would you go about doing that if you're not actually sure of what your purpose is?
Well, this is an interesting and extremely important question for all of us, and it never is finished. You are, for the rest of your life, trying to get a clear sense of why you are here and where you want to put your energy to give you the chance of having the most successful life as defined by you that's humanly possible. And you start out by looking at your deepest values, by really having time to reflect on, go to the end of your life. The more you can go to the end of your life, that's kind of the acid test of really where you want to put your energy, so that whatever life you have a pretty clear understanding of where you want to go with building strengths, with connecting to people. How important are people in your life? Who are the people that matter most? And if there is, I put it in this context, if you had to define what you might refer to as an ultimate mission in your life, the mission for which failure is not an option, that you must complete this mission for you in your own judgment to have been a success while you were here, what would that mission be? And normally it has something to do with your connection to others and who you want to be, particularly during tough times. And the more you kind of build out from that, your sense of, real clarity on the reason that you have come into this world, that you've been granted this gift of life, and how you want to, in a sense, show gratefulness for having been granted this gift. What are you going to do with it, and how are you going to hold yourself accountable? Once you have that, you know where to invest your energy. And for coaches, I think most of them, when they get into it and they reflect back, why did you go into coaching in the first place? Why did you get there? And almost all of them will say, I really wanted to make a difference in the lives of the players that I am working with. And it had very little to do, in most cases, with wanting to be a superstar and to leverage all of this activity with their students to become a superstar. What they really want is to really be a force of good in the lives of all these young people and all these players they're working with. And what we're learning is the more you help them grow as human beings, the better golfers competitively they will become. So that this notion that health ignites performance is a very big issue. And for me, it was the biggest insight of my career, that all I have to do as a person trying to help someone is make sure they get healthier physically, emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually. And they're going to be so much more solid as a competitor. And hopefully that kind of responds to that question, maybe a little bit broader, but I think it's really a great question.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things for me there, Jim. I thought fantastic answer. You touched upon their health ignites performance. You touched upon the energy that we invest in. You know, I know you believe energy is one of our most precious resource, not the time that we have. It'd be interesting to kind of get a little bit more of your thoughts around that as well, on that similar type of topic.
You know, it's interesting. We have all been, in a sense, in my judgment, been sold a bill of goods. We've been taught to believe that time is everything. We build $1 billion industry around time management, and believe that if we just, if we just devote the time that we have to our highest priorities, our life will be successful. And that's absolutely not true. What we have to understand is that time by itself has no valence, has no energy, moves nothing. You must decide what's important in your life. You have to set aside time, but the most important resource you have is actually the energy you invest in the time that you have aligned with the mission. It's the energy that makes things happen. I wrote a whole book on full engagement, which is really our ability to invest our full and best energy right here, right now in what we're doing. And that's a very challenging skill, but it's how we show we care about things. You know, you can be present at home with your family for 4 hours, so you get a lot of kudos in terms of time, but your energy, you were completely disengaged while you were there, and actually you got a negative return for that investment. And the same is true on the golf course. You can be practicing, you put the time in, you have unbelievable time management skills, you're on time, you put all the time in, putting, chipping, driving, and so on and so forth, but your energy wasn't there, so you actually, in some cases, you get worse because you're not fully engaged while you're out there. You're much better off practicing for shorter periods of time and having full engagement, all of your full and best energy, and you're going to get a much better return. So it's not how long you live, it's the energy you bring to the time that you have aligned with what you believe really matters in your life. So it's truly, time is only valuable if we can infuse energy with it. So energy is really the most critical resource we have as human beings.
Yeah, Jim, absolutely. And I've seen that a lot in the past with instruction. You're with a student, both of you are fully invested, there's a lot of energy, there's a focus on the session, the results are good, and then they go away and they're maybe on their own and they don't have that same level of intensity of energy or commitment in, and the results aren't quite as good. And there was a question based around that, and I think you've answered it there. And you touched a little bit earlier upon, you know, the ideal performance state, and I know you've wrote about the ideal performance state, and it's in your course on Leadbetter University as well. Has anything changed in your thinking over the years that you've been in this area and studying human performance?
You know, it's interesting. I started my career because I really didn't understand this whole notion of peak performance. There wasn't a lot. I was in the late 70s. And I really was struggling, trying to understand, you know, this very mysterious space between your ears, this thing called mental toughness. And so I began to, I did a very intensive interview session with across 23 sports and asked them whether and it was in everything from basketball, football, baseball, tennis, golf, all these different sports, even boxing. And I asked the participants who were doing the interviews, to describe what it was like from the inside as close as they could when they were performing at their peak. And I was shocked, completely shocked. I wasn't sure what I would get, but things like physically relaxed, mentally calm, very low anxiety, which was very contradictory to what was happening in a lot of the sports psychology journals at that time, feeling very energized and energized from their positive emotions. There was a sense of enjoyment, even though it was difficult, but it was almost in the context of fun. They felt very effortless. It almost seemed to come easy, even though they were working like dogs. There was a sense of being automatic and instinctive, that they really didn't have to think too much. They weren't thinking about mechanics. They were very present focused. They felt like they were right in the present moment. They had a sense of confidence in themselves, and they didn't have to work at that. And they felt like whatever was happening was within their control. Each one of those represented, some were mental, like calmness, some were physical, like being physically relaxed, some were emotional, like feeling very little anxiety, feeling positively energized. Some were strictly mental, feeling very automatic and instinctive. And what I began to realize is that this is a very delicate balance, physically, emotionally, mentally, that comes together. And it's important because this really has its own unique chemistry. There's this, I call it the IPS kind of soup, in a sense, where all of these are control mechanisms. It's all self-control. And the more you hone your ability to stay calm, to stay relaxed, to get a mindset that keeps you feeling a sense of enjoyment and fun, feeling like you're trusting your mechanics, you're very, very automatic. It's like you're trying to feel like it's coming easily. And the more you can have fun with what you're doing, the greater the chances are that this ignition will take place between what you're capable of doing and what you're actually doing. That it's a very still mysterious, but now we have all this very powerful physiology and mechanisms for monitoring physiology that has actually confirmed a lot of this and helps us to understand what is going on when people feel very calm, when they have very low anxiety, low levels of cortisol. Their EEG patterns are at not a high range of beta, but either a low range of beta or in some cases a high range of alpha. And each one of these, we can measure muscle tension levels through EMG, electromyographic biofeedback. We can actually see when this is happening. So there are physiological correlates to almost every one of these feeling states. And the more a person starts working towards these and gets that self-control, the greater chance that they will execute under pressure. And the more pressure there is, the more challenging this is. But that's the great mystery of sport, and the greatest challenge, I think the last frontier of sport is this mental connection. And because we can't see it, we are frustrated by it, but it's just as real and it's just as concrete as the motor sequences that we have to have in a perfect chip shot or in driving the ball. These are not motor neurons. These are neurons that are actually allowing energy to pass through this cortex, interfacing with motor neurons. It's a very complex process, but it is actually something that we can learn to control. It's not as mysterious as we originally had thought, and that for me is very exciting.
No, that's great. And we talked there for a few moments ago about the energy, and not the time, the energy that you're investing. You developed a 4-dimensional energy model, which I'm interested in, and that of energy model of performance that has received a great deal of attention. You use a pyramid to depict how people can become extraordinary. Can you tell us more about that, Jim?
Yeah, it's an interesting, again, this took years and years to develop, but I felt like a pyramid actually represented what we were learning in our living laboratory with hundreds of thousands of clients over almost 30 years. At the base of the pyramid is what I would call physical energy. That's how it all starts. It all starts in the physical body. Energy is produced in the cells of the body through in the mitochondria of the cells. And glucose and oxygen is important. So if you're going to have energy to drive whatever you're going to do, you have to take care of the physical body. And then on top of that are the emotional nuances that have to occur. And we first develop physically as human beings, and we develop emotionally. And emotional energy is actually represented in the most in the most positive sense through our positive emotions, and trying to, as opposed to fueling performance from anger, fear, disgust, cynicism, and so forth, to try to develop strength in those positive emotions that actually interface with the physical, and it creates a special kind of positive energy. And then on the mental side, so we have physical at the base, then we have emotional, and we develop mentally after the emotional. And this is the whole upgrade, this evolutionary masterpiece, I call it, of this frontal cortex, where we actually have the capacity for abstract thinking, abstract language, for visualizing, for being aware, for being present in the moment, self-control, and all of these things. And there, the mindset that you have, what you're thinking makes a big difference. Your private voice is a huge factor in the performance equation from what we've learned. But this mental part is integrated into the emotional and to the physical. If you haven't eaten properly, if you don't have good nutrition, it's going to affect your thinking, it's going to affect your emotions. It's all fully integrated. And at the top of the pyramid is what I would call the spiritual dimension, or your character, the energy of the human spirit. And we learned that you develop at the base of the pyramid up. You start with the physical, then the emotional, then the mental, and then the spiritual. Your moral and ethical character develops last. But to become an extraordinary human being, you start from the top down. You decide what life is all about for you. Why do you play golf? Let's get that purpose right. Let's get the why. And let's understand who we want to become as a consequence of chasing golf, of chasing something that's extraordinary, hard, difficult. And we get that right, then we start developing the mindset, and that we think about it in a particular way. We make sure that our private voice is always coaching us in ways that reflect that commitment at the highest level, that sense of why and purpose. Then we summon the emotions that serve that, and then we take care of ourselves to make sure we have the energy to actually complete the mission that we established at the top of that pyramid. So we become extraordinary from the top down. And the more people understand that, the more progress they make almost immediately.
Jim, that's fascinating. I think for anybody listening there, a golfer, a coach, anybody that looks after teams, there's so many key areas there that can really help them to develop. One last question, we've probably got time for one. There's a coach has asked a question that some of their students are confused whether or not they should turn professional from the amateur status. The coach feels that they've potentially got the game, but they lack the mental strength needed for tour life and tour golf. And you've probably touched already on many areas that we need to try and potentially help them. But do you have any advice for that coach on how they could help them?
Well, that's a tough situation, obviously. I can simply say this, that coaches have an extraordinary amount of influence over the players that they are and the people that they're teaching. I mean, I have come to really respect that kind of influence that they have. Coaches are influencers. They're motivators. And what you say makes a huge difference. Be very careful what you say to your students, because they hear it and they hold you in high esteem, even though you may not really recognize it fully. Coaches have unbelievable power. And if a player begins to sense that you really care about them as human beings, far more than their ability to perform, that you actually recognize who they are as a person, and want them to be successful because you really care about them as an individual, successful not just in golf, but in life. And they feel that the messaging you're giving them actually reflects that genuinely. They're going to be far more inclined to follow because they recognize you have their best interest at heart. So whether that person should turn pro, if they feel that you really recognize they actually have some deficiencies they have to fill, and that you may not be successful at the pro ranks if you jump in right now. But if you do go in, I want you to recognize that you've got a lot of work to do there, and you may not be as successful as you would like because there's some things that you have to develop. Just like if it were mechanical strength, you have to develop these other strengths. And I think it would behoove you to stay and to work on these things very hard for maybe another year or two, maybe in college. But if you choose to do that, all I want you to know is that I want you to be the healthiest and happiest human being possible. I'll support you, but I really feel you have deficiencies that need to be addressed. And wherever you go, you need to address them, whether you're in the amateur or professional ranks. Oftentimes it's easier in the amateur ranks because you don't have so much pressure on your shoulders. I would deliver some kind of message like that.
Jim, I think that's very sound advice. And, we're coming to the end of the webinar. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you and to get the insights into your years of dedication to your craft, your experience, your learnings, and the willingness that you have to share your knowledge with others. I'm sure everybody listening agrees with that. We've had a great number of people viewing for the entire time. Your course is available at university.leadbetter.com. It's called The Only Way to Win by Dr. Jim Loehr. And for anybody listening today that has interest in Jim's course on our online platform, if you want to use the code webinar10, so webinar10, there's an extra 10% discount if you want to sign up. If you've enjoyed listening to Jim today, you'll certainly enjoy the online experience of the course that I know you put many hours into developing, Jim. So thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing everything with the viewers today. And do you have anything left as a parting piece of knowledge or a golden nugget for us, Jim?
I would just say thank you, Stuart, and thank you for all the listeners. I really hope that you get a return on this. I know you have lots of experiences. I hope they resonate with my experiences. We're all continuing to try to learn. I will continue to be fascinated by this subject until my last breath. We don't have it all, but I think we're getting better, and I hope this will help advance the ball in all of your lives. Thanks for listening.
No, thank you, Jim, and thank you to everybody else. Obviously, at the moment, please stay safe and stay healthy, and we wish you all the best for the future. Don't forget, if you want to sign up for Jim's course, university.leadbetter.com and the code webinar10. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.